This is a theory video based on up to chapter 217 of My Hero Academia. My name is Kor, and this is my co-host Deb. And basically, we're going to start off with chapter 213 and in that opening Pandora's box.
And I am going to let you know before we progress with the Theorio video, in this there are some theories that are going to link to the Vigilante series because there are parts in that do feed into this current stuff that we are learning now. So if you have not had a chance, make sure to read the Vigilantes. This is your one and only warning for spoilers. Diving right on in. So 213, of course, we got introduced to one of the users of One for All. This, of course, we don't know where he is going across any of the chapters yet. We just know he was a previous one. We know, of course, Deku is the 9th, All Might is the 8th, 7th is Nana. One that was introduced, of course, here in this one. We don't know where he falls out, but we do know that the one before Nana was a young man with black hair. I'm assuming that's probably in the lineup is the one that's wearing the kind of longer trench coat. And we learn that, of course, his quirk is Black Whip, and that, of course, Deku will be getting that. Now, the thing here is we learn that it, of course, is a stronger version of what the previous user had. We know we'll probably see both Eraserhead looking into this and All Might looking into this, because Eraserhead's not the kind of guy just to let something slide by without, not wanting to investigate it. All Might, of course, being a previous user, I imagine will want to help Deku as his mentor and as his teacher to help guide him and control this power. The thing that we need to keep in mind here is we don't know in what order he's going to receive these quirks, whether this is just a randomized field of things, but an interesting thing here will be if Nana's quirk is the last, because I have a very specific, I'm very curious on what the quirks are going to be. The first one he gets, of course, he was thinking capture, so he got a capture style quirk. Depending on the order, if Nana is last, I would have to say that Nana's quirk is going to be something that closely relates to Deku, and I wouldn't be surprised if Deku's family is somehow related to Nana in some way, especially with All Might having said that his mother looks a lot like Nana. So whether if Nana had a sister, whether there was another child, or something else, there's definitely a very curiosity there. For the other quirks, I'm imagining since he got a capture quirk here, it's going to be ones that are necessities for doing hero work, things that aren't necessarily that he can't do with a quirk that enhances his strength and speed. So my theories on that are going to be like a defense quirk, a mobility quirk, a sensory, a support, and a rescue quirk. With that, I'd be very curious on what he would get in all these situations, but I've also been kind of looking back through all the chapters, and I noticed that with some of the panels where we see All for One, is he looked like he had Black Whip, so I wouldn't be surprised if before he killed some of the previous users, if he had taken their quirks and may have them and maybe using them, which is very curious to me, because then, for example, if the infrared quirk he's been using was one of the previous users, it could mean that could be the sensory quirk that Deku could be getting. And at an amplified level, if you look at like the EM spectrum of light and things like that, he might be able to sense radio waves, thus being kind of able to give him like an X-ray vision through walls. I don't know what extent. For other ones, like mobility, I would imagine not so much as like flight, because that would be, in my opinion, kind of ridiculous with what he already has, but maybe something that kind of works kind of like how Gentle can, turn anything he touches into like being very flexible, or kind of giving it some rebound, maybe to something that allows him to step on air or something like that, or more like pop steps like you see in Vigilantes. The rescue quirk and, of course, the defense quirk are a little bit harder for me to pin down. For the defense, I could imagine something that allows him to transition damage from someone else to himself, so that way he could protect people that are necessarily outside of his reach. The reason I'm going for the support one last is I'm going to say Nana's quirk will be the support one, and I'm going to say her quirk has something to do with pulling objects to herself, much like Deku's mother's quirk is. And, of course, with it being on a stronger level, he might be able to pull larger objects to himself. But I think that's where the tie-in is going to be between Nana and his mother, is the quirk. And that's why they're choosing not to inform us of what her quirk is right off the bat.
With chapter 213, I've seen a lot of people get upset saying Deku's going to be way too OP, but I don't see it that way, because I think seeing the Nomos for the first time, I mean, nothing like that was ever created before. Seeing them seeing how they've evolved and they're getting stronger and stronger only tells me that Deku's gonna need to get stronger. So this does not bother me. I think Deku's getting too OP.
Well, on that note, we had discussed the Nomus in some of our previous videos, but the big thing here is we know All For One. He's been researching Nomus as far back as the Vigilante series, at least, and that goes 5 years into the past. And we see the way that they're using drugs and genetically engineering villains to become stronger. And in, of course, with Boku no Hero, we're currently seeing a stage of Nomu where they've moved into mixing the quarks together into one body, and then, of course, ones that have multiple quarks, and then now with the high end. But my curiosity is with Deku is, of course, how he, if you look at the very first Nomu we saw, it had those big gnarly scars going across its chest. And when you look at Deku's arm, it reminds me so much of a Nomu. Perhaps Deku is intended to be the perfect Nomu. Maybe this was an experiment. All For One had started long ago. I'm sure if he can take quarks, I'm pretty sure he can sense a user has a quark. So I wouldn't be surprised if he imposed this quark onto his brother, knowing that his brother's quark could not only absorb a quark, but then pass it on. And to continually do that until he felt that it was time to basically collect it. At that point, Deku has basically become the perfect Nomu. He's going to have 7 quarks with none of the downsides so far, which is unprecedented across the other ones, because even with the high end, it at best maybe had a childlike intelligence, but to have one that can learn and continually, step forward and progress is exactly what he's looking for as far as Nomus go.
Yeah, this is something we've talked about many times, and we think honestly, All For One gave his brother One For All on purpose because he thinks that his brother and how he is could be the perfect catalyst for it based on his emotions and for it to grow. And I think All For One was basically waiting for One For All to build up to a certain point where he could take it back. And I think his aim is for immortality and to be the perfect being so he could take control.
Exactly. I can't imagine that he'd hand it to his brother without some kind of a fail-safe and some way to be able to control it or know when it was ready. And then, of course, like we saw with him in the prison, he was able, of course, stirring that he could hear his brother's voice before this whole situation ended up going down, before Deku manifested that second quark. But the things to keep in mind is, was this something intended that Deku would end up with it since childhood? Or was this just a random guess that it would go in that direction? Because with the doctor that Deku had as a child, we of course see that he looks very similar to, of course, the doctor that was standing behind All For One. So it's very possible that that doctor could have been selecting out quarks that were of use, going from there and basically allowing it to go that route. Or they were stealing the quarks, they were God knows what, and then lying to the parents that the children were quarkless, and that Deku just happened to be that lucky. I wouldn't put it past the fact that All For One could be steering it in the exact way he wants it to, but that also leans towards the fact that perhaps Deku is much like the first user who had a secret quark, which of course is amplifying the very basis of the quark itself, and that is what is allowing it to manifest. Because as we know, the one user explains to him that the flames have been expanding, but now this is the actual core of the quark that is growing, not just the flames. So you're seeing a stronger base version of the actual quark.
Yeah, we're thinking that Deku is the perfect person the original catalyst was looking for One For All to grow like it is and expanding and evolving. There's something special about Deku. We are going to find out. I can't wait to find that out in the future because there has to be something special about Deku. There's been 7 previous users and he's the first one for this to happen to.
And of course, moving along, we see that Deku is afraid to lose control with it. The previous user, of course, tells him to be careful with that anger and, to control his heart, which lends me to believe that maybe a previous one of the users may have accidentally killed somebody or severely harmed somebody with the powers that be. And that's why he wants to inform Deku, there's nothing wrong with being upset, but to make sure to control it. Because even with a small child, if they get angry, they'll lash out and do things they don't intend to do. And I can only imagine that even with a grown adult, especially with powers like these, where 13 had said people, they're powers that can easily kill someone. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's been heroes in the past, and especially a previous user of One for All, to have accidentally harmed somebody that they didn't intend to.
I think for Deku, he needs to balance his mental state just as much as his physical state. What I think is what's happening is he needs, because he's been focusing this whole time on basically physical things. Right now, I think for him to unleash that power, he needs to be able to control his mental state, and he needs to really work on that hard, because just like, we saw, for example, the Avengers movie, the first one with Bruce Banner, at the end there when he first turns into Hulk, he tells Iron Man, the key to it is that he's always upset. It's for him to be able to control that. So I think Deku, he needs to really work on his mental state, and once he does that, I think he could be able to unlock what he unlocked before.
Exactly. And then of course with the matchup between him and Shinzo during that fight, it was a very interesting thing because basically both of them with the capture cork and with his black whip, they're basically identical. So I can only imagine that we'll be seeing an arc down the road where you see them training together, strengthen each other with the capture cork and with black whip. A very similar tool. We can of course expect to see training between Deku and Bakugo. I can only imagine Bakugo and training with Shinzo as well. And then of course with Shoto, I can imagine that he'll also help Deku in learning to do multiple corks, and vice versa, since they both have 2 right now, but of course we know Deku will eventually have a total of 7.
I think Bakugo is dying to duel with Deku as much as he can, because that's right there is his ultimate rival. Right there is, he wants to surpass One for All. So I think he's gonna get every chance he can to get, and it's gonna make him stronger. Just like in boxing, when you spar against good people, you get good people in training camp, you become better and stronger. And Bakugo, I think he's going to take every opportunity. When Deku gets stronger, he's going to go spar against him just to get better himself, because he wants to surpass One for All. He wants to surpass All Might, the legend that is All Might. He wants to become the number one hero.
I definitely agree with that. And then, of course, with another theory that I kind of want to throw out there. It's kind of out of the blue, so I do apologize for that. But with the stirring of All for One, I had noticed that with the fact that he's in there and he's kind of stirring, we had a feeling that he was actually purposely caught so that way he could get into Tartarus. Because I imagine it'd be no easy feat to get into Tartarus. I'm sure some of the guards are extremely, combat ready. I'm sure they have strong corks, and I would probably say they're probably elites in their own right. But the thing is if he's not capable of using a cork in there, it was very interesting to me that he was able to tell what All Might was wearing when he was in there, especially since he has no eyeball. So which means he is able to activate some sort of sensory cork. We know those are going to be coming in a chapter. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a prison escape arc. And the thing with that is you got to keep in mind there's a lot of villains in there that probably All Might put in there, and a lot of them are probably associates to All for One, and them escaping will probably not be the best. We of course know Stain is in there. I wouldn't be surprised if Muscular is in there. Very possible Moonfish was put in there. And then, of course, going by the Vigilante series, most likely the one that has the speed quirk that kind of allows him to extremely move very quickly. So he's probably in there. And all of them getting loose wouldn't be good. I can probably speculate Muscular would probably straight up want vengeance against Deku, whether that be going straight for him or going after, one of his loved ones. I wouldn't put it past Muscular. But at the same time, since we know Stain has recognized Deku, I wouldn't be surprised if Stain ends up saving his mother or anything like that, just because it's not in Stain's personality just to kill just anybody. No, he's not going to be okay with just taking out civilians. That's not what he's about. But we know that there's probably some sort of a prison escape arc coming up here soon.
Yes, that's one of the things we've been theorizing about in private is All for One. We can't see him not breaking out. I mean, I think that he wanted to be in prison, and because it stated that All for One was more powerful than the last time All Might faced him, and I think him killing All Might would make him into a mortar. So Marty, sorry, I pronounced that wrong. We theorized that All for One for sure wanted to be in prison. I think because he wants to. All for One stated to All Might when they fought that he put all his comrades into prison. So I wouldn't be surprised to see All For One want to create a small army of people that he could trust and rely on to advance his agenda. So that's something to look forward to. We definitely think that's going to be a thing. Plus, All For One, we think it really wants to develop himself, the nobles, further, so he could create the perfect noble. So that way he could transfer everything into that noble and he could live forever.
The thing with that is, though, throw that a wrench into that would be the fact that with Eerie being able to reverse people, she could actually reverse the damage to his body. So I mean, with the knowledge of that now, once he's got basically his army back, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes looking straight for Eerie, so that way he can then take that and be able to reverse himself back into a state where his body is in a much healthier state than it currently is, basically hooked up to an iron lung and having to use a cork to be able to see. So he's not in a good state.
Yeah, I think Aerie in the future, once All For One figures out Aerie's ability, he's definitely going to go for her. So it's going to be interesting in the future. Aerie, I think, is definitely going to be a secret weapon for the heroes to and Deku to be able to help with All For One, because All For One he just keeps on getting more powerful and more powerful.
And of course, with the most recent chapter, we had it very heavily implied that Deku's quirk, One for All and All For One, are very similar, since they're both, one of them takes your quirk, while the other one seems to be passed along and gather the quirk of the user that had it. So if it wouldn't have been for the fact that All Might was quirkless, he would also then have All Might's quirk. So it's very the opposite side of what the other one is. Why one's stealing, the other one's basically asking for permission. But that also brings up the question, when All Might explained to him that you could force the quirk onto somebody, what if that has always been passed along to the other users, that you could force someone to take it, what the whole purpose of that is, because they made it very clear that they're very similar in this last chapter. And that, to me, once again alludes back to capabilities that Deku is the perfect Nomu, and that we're going to see more of a interesting development on that. And of course, we know that they have some of Deku's blood, and what use they plan to use that for, we still don't know, whether it be to use him in the Nomus or what. But we know that after they gather that is the development of the high end, so maybe they're going to copy whatever's in that to make better Nomus from Deku. So we'll have to see how that develops, because we should be coming up on probably of the villains again. So hopefully we'll see where that goes. But with that, we know that, of course, Hawks is kind of working both sides of that. And we know Endeavor was, of course, almost lost to the high end he was up against, but we know Shoto is going to go to him for training now. And I would either say he's going to teach him Flash Fire or capabilities that he doesn't currently have, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see the end of Endeavor here soon, that it's going to be one of those moments where Father passes the torch onto the son, and then Father, of course, then meets an unfortunate end, especially since he barely got out of it the last time. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Endeavor fall soon.
For some reason, I don't see him falling soon, just because the people in Class A are definitely the most powerful in the next generation. Let's be honest here, and they're not even close already yet to be on Endeavor's level. So I could see definitely Endeavor dying, and this is something we differ on, which is good. You always want to not agree on everything, but I think if Endeavor does die, it's going to be when they graduate and they're ready. They're a lot more powerful. So I don't see him dying soon, just because of that. Right now, he's probably the most powerful hero.
We'll see. That's why what I think is going to be coming up on that is, with the development between Class A, Class B, and now with Shinzo, I wouldn't be surprised if in the second year we see a split of the class or some extra class added in there, basically where they bump up the stronger ones, so that way they can start developing faster and stronger, because they need to fill that void. The fact that they haven't released yet what class Shinzo's going to be in makes me think that they're going to create a more elite class of heroes. With that, and with how One for All thinks, he is very much the kind of person that wants to see the downfall of society, or of hero society. So my thought is kind of like with the original movie with Judge Dredd, where you had police showing up to crimes and then getting killed. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same case here. You get heroes showing up to crimes that either they can't stop the villain or they get overpowered, and it quickly makes it either where heroes don't want to respond to it, where you start getting a huge amount of people flowing away from being in the hero course, things like that, because they're not going to want to be in those dangerous situations. And it's going to lead to very much like what Stain said, that there's a bunch of heroes that are about the fame and the pay, but when it comes down to it, they're not willing to put their lives on the line to save people. And I think that's what his ultimate goal is to start making the heroes less heroic.
And I think One for All, he said something that was very interesting in the previous chapter. When he was in prison, he moved, and basically they told All Might that they reported. But during that panel, he said that he was excited because he hasn't heard his brother's voice in a long time. So I think for the first time, All for One realized that One for All is developing to the point that he wanted. Because as soon as this happened is when Deku started having those problems with his ability. So definitely, I think All for One is definitely going to start moving big time now. I think he knows that it's manifested to a point where he wanted, that he's been waiting so many years for. Because another theory that we were talking about is All for One. If this was really a thorn in his side of the quirk he gave his brother, he could have killed the One for All users before they passed it on. I think he's waiting for them to pass it on before he kills them, and then I think he's been taking their quirks before he kills them. But that's definitely a theory we had on that.
I agree with that, because the panel where he fought Nana and All Might escaped, he easily was dealing with her without a problem. I don't see how he wouldn't have been able to catch All Might and take care of him as well. I feel very much like he let him escape, and the fact that he knew it was Deku that he had passed it on to, and I feel like if he had really wanted to that day when Deku saved Bakugo, there's no doubt in my mind that he could easily have killed them without a problem. And I have a feeling he knew he was there behind that wall, but he wants it to continue to grow. He wants it to get to that point where he can collect it and it'll be even more omnipotent than it currently is. Because we don't know if with the previous users, if he was gathering their quirks, if they were already kind of starting to get beefed up from it, things like that, or if he was able to steal their quirks, if it would have already been part of that when it got passed on, it left them. But from what we've seen, it looked like he had, of course, Black Whip. But I have no doubt that if he had wanted to, he could have stopped this chain of events at any time he had wanted to, from whether it be his brother, the second user, the third user, the fourth, or so on down the road. But in this case, he hasn't done anything to really stop it. He's been just allowing it. And the fact that he allowed All Might to go, as many years as he did with having it before they even had their first confrontation. That I don't want to say he was okay with losing his lieutenants and all in his lower ranking staff, but he ended up losing them before he even engaged All Might. So whether that was a difference in strength or he was seeing if it was quite ready, we don't know, but he could have definitely stepped in long before it got to that stage and, of course, stopped it.
I definitely agree on that assessment. All for One, he likes playing with your emotions. It's like he likes to play chess out there, And I find him to be very calculating and manipulating. It's one of those villains that, of course, you want to root against, but it's like they're fucking badass.
From the other mangas I've read, he's very much a person that will only engage in a fight that he knows he's going to win. So with that in mind, if it was all within his calculations, then we know he wanted Tomaru to step up, but two, we also know that he seems to be kind of enjoying his life there in prison. He still seems to be calculating and all that, especially with him telling All Might that when All Might tells him that he's going to be in there for the rest of his days, and he pretty much throws back, that we'll see about that, which means he already knows that he can get out of there at any moment. And I have no doubt if he even instantaneously activated the quirks he has, that he could easily take the place down. But that still comes back to, is there an unknown factor in there that he is very hesitant about, which makes me think that outside the heroes there could be Quirk Task Force intended to bring down larger threats, because we haven't seen anything about military or anything like that having quirks, and which comes to me as a surprise. They have heroes, but we haven't seen any major task force or military present anywhere. And we know that they would have had to have had quarks of some way. So I can only imagine that there has to be some sort of elite force there that has quarks. So we'll see ultimately when he decides to make his move what Tartarus holds in store and what lies within the depths, because I wouldn't be surprised if there are villains in there that we can only imagine what strength they had and what he'll plan to do with them, because once his empire rises back, we can only imagine that Deku wouldn't be able to openly compete with it yet. He's only at 20%, and we know that won't be enough. It wasn't, even when he used 5% on muscular, it was nowhere near, and even a full 100% the first time didn't take him out. And that wasn't even relatively close to fighting someone on All For One's level. So there had to have been a reason beyond the Tomuru that he would put himself in a situation where he felt that he could be captured unless he intended to be captured.
Yeah, I want to know if there's some kind of like treaty that was made between the entire world that you can't use quirk users as in the military, because I can't see how greedy this world is. Countries not using people with quirks into the military.
And to get every country to agree to it, if you just look at normal society and nukes, when you start building up those arms, you can only think that other countries would be nervous. So with Japan having All Might, for example, I can't imagine Russia okay with him being recognized there and not having some sort of task force that would be able to bring him down if in case, if they were to make a move, because everyone always wants what someone else has. So I can only imagine the rest of the world. So there, and when you go into like more of the other countries out there, whether it be, Saudi Arabia, Britain, America, Mexico, I'm sure they all have very strong heroes, but at the same time, you would think that they'd want some sort of a way to be able to keep those heroes in check if they were to suddenly go AWOL. So I can only imagine that there's things in place for that as well.
Yeah, I'm surprised they never mentioned that in the story, because that's one of the first things that popped in my head when I started reading the series.
I can only imagine in the very first years where Quark users came out, I can only imagine the ones that had more destructive skills. I can only imagine, unless there was some epic war that went down between the countries because of Quark users, that it brought around world peace. All it would take is a warlord to come up with a strong Quark, and we know All For One has been around since the beginning, and he had to have his finger in every single nation's doings. So I can only imagine that he's probably got some puppet governments that he's instilled. So I would think that you wouldn't agree to a deal for world peace necessarily, but we know he's been there since the beginning.
And the history with All For One has been kept under wraps from the public. I can only imagine how it was in the past, because All For One, he's been around for a very long time. And they said he's controlled basically Japan in the past. From the shadows, he's controlled Japan. But I just wonder how much influence that went in the past, because they don't mention the past that often.
Yeah, they don't really, and especially since they're in school, I would think that there'd be history lessons. I know they kind of covered vigilante history and that laws came about, but they don't really seem to cover any other form of history as far as the early days of Quark users. And we know that One For All's subordinates, of course, were killing people that were doing good. So at some point, something must have happened where they at least gained enough strength or support that they were safer to conduct their business, or they weren't really denting his business, so he really didn't care if they were stopping weak little gas station thefts. They weren't stopping his main form of operations. So, but we'll see about that. Another theory I've always had is that the whole sole purpose of UA is to purely find new users for One For All. Because we know All Might attended there. No one's come forward and said they attended classes with All Might. But the fact that now, of course, Nedzu invited him in to find a successor. It seemed like he was going, wanted to go there, and of course he had met Nana. Whether she was a teacher or whatever, how they met, we don't know. We just know he met her. That's curious, in my opinion, as well, since we know UA's been around for quite some time. So we can only speculate how these people are finding these other users to pass it down to. There's got to be some sort of method that they've been using to track these people, to find suitable successors.
Yeah, especially the fact that only the principal and the nurse knows, from my understanding of One For All. So I'm thinking that every principal that comes up knows about this, and they're currently, helping to try to recruit students for the One For All users. And I think this possibly went into effect. It started going into effect once All For One lost his power and hold over Japan in the shadows. That this was instilled as a program ever since then to always make sure they keep him in check.
With the school always being there, it could have easily been from his brother, and for him to basically, I don't want to say train an army to go up against it, but to teach people to be just and grow and do good with the powers they've been given rather than misuse them. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's got a long history, but once again, we haven't really heard anything about the school's history or how long it's been around. So be curious to see if we can get some more backstory into that, or if there's some reason that we don't see that. The other thing I wanted to also theorize about was with Deku during this arc, he got hit in the face, but no one can seem to figure out how he got hit because he never got touched on that side of his face. So I'm very curious on how Monomo was able to pull that off, whether it was because Deku had gotten hit in the face there earlier, if Deku had gotten slapped by Ochako trying to wake him up, maybe Ochako snuck in a kiss and that was the impact that he was able to duplicate, or if he was able to use One For All and pull off a very small air blast and then basically use twin impact to then hit him in the face, because he says that a shot had been fired. Well, what exactly did he shoot? I don't, did he perhaps do a One For All and then just kind of steer it using Poltergeist? Hopefully we'll learn on that, but that also leans towards if Monomo can copy Quartz and if he's just lying about what he's copying.
It sounded like in the latest chapter 217 that he's pretty straightforward with it. I don't think he's lying because he looked like he was sincere about it. He gave a very good explanation why he can't control Deku's quirk at that power.
Yeah, but with that, at the same time, you could say that Deku was very sincere by saying that, he didn't have multiple quirks when he was talking to Shoto. Could all be an act that he's putting on, because we still need to find out who the UA traitor is, which I think we can rule out probably. I know a lot of people are pointing towards teacher, that there's got to be a teacher. I think we can rule out Eraserhead because he seemed to have had what sounds like a previous student or a previous partner or something mentioned in this last chapter. We don't know what exactly they are to him, but it seemed like it was kind of an emotional mix, and that probably lends into the fact that he has completely expelled a class before. And, he did it on the grounds that they had no potential, but what it could be is to protect people that aren't necessarily fit for going out there. He doesn't want people to get hurt, mainly the students, because that's probably something he carries on himself. And I think that's probably one thing that tears him apart, watching Deku constantly just destroying his body to fight, as he can't stand that. He's supposed to be able to protect his students and all that, and he's got a student that's literally destroying himself. But for the UA traitor, though, I still have to point my finger at Monomo. I just do not trust him. He's so egotistical, and I just can't trust him.
Yeah, I still can't put my finger on anybody right now. I mean, usually the traitors are usually the people who you don't expect. I don't think Monoma is a traitor just because there's no way a traitor would be that out in front of the way he's been acting. That's just me, though.
Another points to point out for traitor is the very first night when he had the dream and he spoke to the first user. The fact that it was pointed out to Deku that his door was open, that it hadn't even been closed, could lean towards the fact that someone in Class A could be the traitor. And if I had to point my finger at someone there, I'd probably have to call it out on the Invisagirl, just for the raw fact that she could have still been standing in the room with him if she had tried to hurt him in some way, and then leaning towards what Bakugo had said, that maybe it activates if his life's in danger, and that's why he had the dream that night, was his life was in danger, because it looked like he had destroyed a small section of his room, and that could have been the quirk activated to protect him against a threat that was in there with him. And then, since he was awake and unaware of what had happened, she could have easily have just been standing there and no one would have noticed her.
And that concludes our theory video. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
And like always, make sure if you like what you heard, click the like button down at the bottom and subscribe.